What's up guys, you're watching Life by TCG. Got a quick MTG deck profile for you today on Modern Enduring Ideal. So you'll notice that all the borders on my cards are the hazard borders that don't own the cards borders. I was just messing about with this on the recent All Access period for the new Eldraine set. Having a bit of fun with this. I think it's like an interesting deck, but maybe not super competitive, and we'll get into why. So if you're not familiar with this strategy in the past, the idea is that you play this 7 mana sorcery and then you win the game on the spot. So you search your deck for an enchantment, put it directly into play, and then you can't cast any spell for the rest of the game, but every turn in your upkeep you get to keep doing this over and over again, so you can just keep searching for a new enchantment every turn. And there's no restriction on mana cost or anything, so you can get some really powerful enchantments. It's pretty easy to win the game from there. So how we do that? What enchantments are we searching for? One of the most important ones, Dovescape. Whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, counter it, and then the spell's controller gets some bird tokens. So of course we're not playing any spell for the rest of the game after this resolves. We're just putting the copy directly onto the stack. So we won't be affected by this at all, but every non-creature spell the opponent plays gets countered. Obviously very strong. Not only does it counter whatever the opponent's attempting to do to win the game, it also counters things that would remove your enchantments. So yeah, great way to lock out the game. Another way to lock out the game, Overwhelming Splendor. Enchanted player, their creatures have no abilities and all become 1/1s, so it's like one-sided humility, and they can't activate any activated ability that's not a mana ability or a loyalty ability. So they couldn't activate their creature abilities already anyway, because their creatures are just 1/1s with no text, but they can't activate any activated ability of any card. So they can't activate creature lands, they can't turn their like Inkmoth Nexus into a creature, they can't cycle cards in their hand because that's an activated ability as well. They can't activate like Otawara or Boseiju from their hand to deal with your enchantments. That's obviously very important because those cards aren't spells, so Dovescape doesn't stop them either. And also important that Dovescape doesn't stop creature spells, right? Only non-creature spells. So if your opponent has like a Haywire Might or something that could remove your enchantments, then Overwhelming Splendor will stop that as well. So between both of these cards, you're pretty much stopping anything the opponent can do. But then you might notice that both of these cards don't actually stop you dying on the board. Like this helps because it makes your opponent's creatures 1/1s, but they can still keep beating you down. So in that type of situation, if your opponent has like tons of creatures, Phyrexian Unlife is what you get. So you don't lose the game for having 0 or less life. If you have 0 or less life, you take damage as infect instead. So immediately that's just like a 10 life buffer, but it's often actually more than that, because if say you're on like 5 life and you take 10 damage all at once through like combat, for example, that's a pretty common scenario. You don't go to 0 life and 5 poison counters, you just take the 10 damage all in one shot. So you'll go from +5 life to -5 life, and then the next time you take damage it will be as poison counters. So it's a really big buffer in terms of surviving, and more importantly it combos with this card, which is both your win con and also combos with Phyrexian Unlife to help you survive. So this is Form of the Dragon. At the beginning of your upkeep, deals 5 damage to any target, so that's how you win the game. And then at the beginning of each end step, so your end step and opponent's end step, your life total becomes 5. So you're on 5 life, your opponent attacks you, and as long as they don't have anything with double strike or first strike, it's all dealt in one shot. So you'll go from +5 to like negative something, then at the end of your turn your life total will become 5 again. So if your opponent has no first strike or double strike, which they won't have if their creatures have no abilities, or if your opponent can't like cast burn spells on you, which they can't if all their spells are getting countered by Dovescape. Like there's no way for them to break through this. And it also says creatures your opponents control without flying can't attack. And Overwhelming Splendor makes your opponent's creatures lose all their abilities. So your opponent just straight up can't attack if you have both of these in play. So that's another way you can lock out the game just with Splendor and Dragon. You don't even need the Phyrexian Unlife depending on your opponent's board state. So those 4 cards are like the package that wins you the game with Enduring Ideal. But how are we casting this card? So it's a 7 mana big expensive sorcery. One of the easiest ways to ramp up to 7 mana is Lotus Bloom. Gives you 3 extra mana on turn 4, which is the perfect sequence to play a 7 mana spell. Not too much else to say about that. But another option to help cast this easily is with Devotion. So we have Nykthos and also this Nyx Lotus. Both adds a mana, extra mana for every devotion you have. We have a lot of ways to generate devotion. We have Potion of Healing, 1 white devotion, draw a card. Wall of Omens, white devotion, draw a card. You have this option as well, which is basically just in the deck because it's 3 white devotion. So those are ways that you can ramp into Enduring Ideal a bit faster. But it's also totally possible to just survive, draw cards, and make 7 land drops. Especially with the new huge impact this has had on Modern with the 1 ring from the Lord of the Rings set. So this is the perfect archetype for this card, similarly to how it's being used in red-green Scapeshift decks. It does basically every single thing you want. Like, you're only surviving 1 extra turn is such a big deal in a deck where once you cast your 1 big spell, you basically win instantly. And then it's also helping you draw extra cards, making sure that you have the resources to find Enduring Ideal, to find your 7 mana sources you need to play it, to chain extra 1 ring together. It's like the perfect effect for the deck. It's so much stronger than previous versions of Enduring Ideal that I've played. Other new card the deck can play is Reprieve, the white remand. Similarly to One Ring, and like how the blue versions of Scapeshift in the past have played remand, it just delays the game while replacing itself. You know, as you're playing this, you're making more land drops, you're getting closer to playing Enduring Ideal, you're ticking down counters on your Lotus Bloom. Like this kind of like counter, like return a spell, draw a card is like a perfect effect for the deck as well. So one interesting card, which I'm also playing 4 copies of here, is Search for Glory. So this lets you search your deck for a legendary card, and the prime target for that, of course, is the One Ring, which is legendary. So having lots of copies of Search for Glory in your deck makes it very reliable that you can play One Ring on turn 4. You also gain a life for every snow mana you spend on this, so like even though spending 3 mana on your whole turn 3 just to search a library and not affect the board at all is quite slow. Like you are still surviving a little bit because it's helping you gain life at the same time. And again, the One Ring's so powerful that you're just happy to be able to do that more consistently. So that's pretty much the whole deck. There's just a few one-offs. So Eternal Wanderer is a nice card. It's, of course, all Planeswalkers are legendary, so you can search for it with Search for Glory. It's another big expensive spell that your Devotion and your Lotus Bloom can help you to cast if you need to. With the ultimate ability you can use straight away to clear the board. And it's a backup win condition in case somehow your opponent exiles your Form of the Dragon. Just by making the Samurai tokens to beat down. The +1 ability, you blink an artifact or a creature, so you can exile Wall of Omens or Potion of Healing to draw a card, or you can also reset the One Ring. So it comes back untapped, so you can immediately draw another card, and it also resets the burden counters, so you won't be dying to this. if you built up too many counters on your One Ring, you can play Eternal Wanderer to reset it. Even in the middle of Enduring Ideal, when you can't cast spells anymore, you can get Eternal Wander out of your graveyard with Elspeth Conquers Death. And the other nice thing about Elspeth Conquers Death is it's just really nice to have an Oblivion Ring effect to search for with Enduring Ideal. Because, for example, if your Enduring Ideal resolves and your opponent controls Teferi Time Raveler, that's very awkward because, like, they can use Teferi to bounce your Dovescape. Overwhelming Splendor doesn't stop it because it's a loyalty ability. So you want to have some kind of effect in the deck that you can search for with Enduring Ideal that kills a permanent. And the first chapter of Elspeth Conquers Death is very good at doing that. And once you get to the final chapter of Elspeth Conquers Death, it goes to the graveyard, right? You sacrifice it, and then at that point you can put it back in your deck with all of Heliod's Generosity or Mistveil Plains to search it with Enduring Ideal again and keep looping it. So in case your Eternal Wanderer somehow died, you get it back again. Yeah, it's just pretty hard to stop. So the last weird one-of in the deck is the Teleportation Circle. It's just like a value one-of. Again, it blinks Potion or Wall of Omens to draw a card, or you can blink your ring to draw cards and reset the counters. It's not very good at multiples because you need a separate target for each one. You can't blink the same thing multiple times. But yeah, it's just in the deck to be like a nice value one-of. Oh yeah, the nice thing about Phyrexian Unlife 2, which I didn't mention, is because you don't lose the game for having 0 or less life. And as long as you have 0 or less life, damage is dealt to you with Infect. But One Ring doesn't deal you damage, it's just life loss. So you can have 1,000,000 counters on your One Ring and lose 1,000,000 life, and as long as you have Phyrexian Unlife in play, you won't lose the game. So that's a really nice thing about Unlife as well. Like if you drew like 5 cards off your One Ring and you finally drew Enduring Ideal, but like searching for any other enchantment would make you lose the game, you can just quickly get Unlife so you don't die to your One Ring. That's a valuable thing that Unlife can do. Yeah, and it's good to note that Boseiju, not the Boseiju most people know these days, but the old Boseiju, it's legendary, which means you can search it with the Search for Glory, and making your game-winning spell uncounterable is obviously great versus any blue deck. Other minor things to think about, like sometimes you make angels off this when you gain 3 life, because this gains 3 life if you spend 3 snow mana on it, and this gains 3 life if you activate it. So that's worth noting as well. Usually this is just in the deck to search for to help you ramp the devotion. Yeah, I think that's most of the synergies in the main deck. The other like little gameplay tip is you often want to use these as much as possible in spots where you are comboing off with this, just to make sure that you don't draw one of these key pieces on a key turn. Because if you top deck a card, you can't cast it, because you can't cast any spell, and you can't put it into play either, so it sort of becomes like stuck. So you want to make sure that you put like a useless card on top of your deck so you don't draw one of these. It's just a little gameplay tip. But the nice thing about One Ring is that after you've comboed off, you can keep activating One Ring to draw a bunch of cards, which makes it much easier to discard cards to hand size, which means you can put them away with these and search for them again. Yeah, previously that was a little bit more awkward to do in old builds of the deck. You had to play like Peace of Mind or a card that would let you discard something. But now you just have One Ring and you can discard to hand size. It's really good. So yeah, that's the whole main deck. In the sideboard, it's a bit all over the place. Like Leyline I think is alright versus Scam. It's obviously very popular right now. Leyline's much better in this deck than in other generic decks because you care about the devotion. Of course, you can always use Leyline versus like Burn or Valakut or things like that as well. Similarly, like Ruined Halo is a good option versus Valakut or any deck that wins by attacking with creatures. like Murktide or yeah, a lot of different strategies Rune Halo is pretty decent against. You do want to be conscious of the fact that in a lot of matchups they're grindy and they also have a lot of interaction, and those decks often also play Teferi Time Reveler as well, which blocks the suspend. So having cards to board in versus blue decks like that is pretty good as well. So Grand Demolisher is a decent option. Your opponent can't do anything in your turn, so you know your Enduring Ideal will resolve. And another good option is just like Skyclave Apparition. You can kill their like Ren and 6 or their Teferi, and it's a good card to flicker with these things as well. And it can also like attack down their Planeswalker or kill their Omnath, or like this is just pretty good in the grindy matchups. And then otherwise you just have like whatever white sideboard cards. So like play this versus Scam or any other black or red deck that cares about the graveyard. Again, double white Devotion is nice. And then you just have to think about whatever other white card you could play, like Portable Hole. It's not bad. You could play like Rest in Peace if you think it's good versus the meta, or yeah, there's lots of different options you have available. One option you can think about with the sideboard is like, would there be a matchup potentially where my motor is chopped off my mana base? Potentially there could be a matchup where you literally board all of this out and you just become like a kind of mono white mid-range deck that wins with like Eternal Wanderer. But I don't think it's reasonable to build a sideboard that has like 12 cards for this purpose. But it's interesting to think about. So, like, you might be wondering, do I seriously recommend this deck as a competitive option? And the answer is probably not. Even though the deck has become a lot stronger compared to any other version of Enduring Ideal that I've played in the past, just because One Ring is so good in it. The issue that I keep running into that I can't really think of a good solution for is that it's too easy for your opponent to juke this combo. Like, specifically, this dies to Boseiju and this gets bounced by Teferi, and it's very hard to navigate to a spot where like you can confidently answer only half of that problem. For example, if your opponent has like Ren and 6 plus Boseiju, like your entire combo is sort of shut off, which is quite bad, right? Because that's not an uncommon scenario in Modern. So that's definitely a big issue. Like, compared to Scapeshift, I think it has a lot more trouble versus that deck specifically. Like the 4-color blue value pile. So that's certainly could be an issue. But apart from that, I think this deck is definitely not as bad as it looks. And compared to Scapeshift, like, you're kind of doing the same strategy as Scapeshift, like you're in a very similar lane, but like you're less worried about like Blood Moon effects or like life gain you don't care about. Like if your opponent has the One Ring trigger protecting them for a turn, like you don't care about that either. Like you just Dovescape them and then they untap and they can't do anything, so you don't care. It's not like Valakut where you have to like take a turn off to wait for the One Ring protection to go away before you can Scapeshift them. Yeah, so like the deck definitely has upsides. The other thing about this deck is that it's not only weak to Boseiju, like Force of Vigor becomes an issue. Of course, Dovescape stops that, but then you have the same issue where you don't know which one you're supposed to be playing around. Yeah, so like there are spots where I think this deck might be decent as a sort of like scape shift analog, especially if in a metagame where you identify that some of the white sideboard cards might be really good. Like if you see that the metagame is really soft to like Leyline or Ruined Halo, then you could even build this deck with those in the main deck if you wanted. And it would be fine, like they give you more devotion. And if it stops your opponent's plan almost completely, then it's going to give you enough time to draw into the Enduring Ideal, like compared to the cantrip that these would give you. In the past, people sometimes built this deck with Suppression Field, but you don't want to do that now because it blocks your own ring activations. I don't know what happened to my mana base. It's disappeared. I have to bring that back somehow. But yeah, so that's the deck. Definitely a fun one. This is like one of my pet decks as a person who like plays a whole bunch of random stuff. You know, when I say this is a pet deck, then it's probably not great, but I just like the sort of like wild different things you can do in Magic the Gathering. Compared to some other TCGs, they're a lot more like how can I phrase this? Like a lot more like refined, or the margins are very thin on the actions you can take. Whereas here you can just play this like colossal boom boom thing that like totally prevents your opponent from casting spells and doing anything. And then, yeah, it's just wild to sort of see what the system allows. But yep, that will be the end of today's video. This has been Li-Fi TCG with modern mono white Enduring Ideal. Signing out.